Good afternoon, everyone. Afternoon. Thank you. Welcome to the August installment of the Chamber of Commerce 2019 Power Luncheon Series. I'm Peter Von Stein of Wharton Smith, proud to once again serve as chairman of the Power Luncheon Series this year. Today's Power Luncheon will feature a forum of the candidates running for election in North Carolina's 3rd Congressional District. Before we begin the forum, we'd like to take a moment to recognize our sponsors this year. This year's Power Luncheons are presented once again by Wharton Smith, PA. Gold sponsors for 2019 are ECS Southeast, Hill, Chesson & Woody, iGo Creative, MHA Works, Raymond James, and Transworld Business Advisors. Silver sponsors this year include the Daily Reflector, Executive Personnel Group, and Vidant Medical Center. Please join me in thanking our 2019 sponsors. Additionally, I'd like to thank our video and television partners that we have recording today. GPAT TV and Interbanks Media for recording and later rebroadcasting the forum. Thank you all. All right, so that we can move forward towards beginning the forum, I'll have our 4 candidates join me on stage. Gentlemen. You leave the cake?
I left the cake. Hey, bud.
Good to see you, man. All right. I've been doing this for 47 years.
I guess we can remove our name tag. Yeah. Stick it down there just for subtitles.
Great. With us today, we have Mr. Tim Harris, Mr. Greg Holt, Dr. Greg Murphy, and Mr. Alan Thomas. Gentlemen, thank you all for agreeing to participate in today's candidate forum. I'm sure I speak for everyone here and at home when I say that we're all anxious to hear from you considering the importance of this election. You'll notice that we have a timekeeper here in front who will warn you when you're approaching the end of your time limit during the various stages of our forum today. When she holds up the sign that says stop, please conclude your comments so that we can move on then to the next candidate. All right, so the format for today's forum is set out in your bulletin there. We're going to begin with opening statements. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to give an opening statement. Please be cognizant of your time, gentlemen. We have a lot we're going to try to get through today and not much time to do it. As we discussed with the candidates beforehand, we'll be proceeding with opening statements and opening remarks alphabetically based on last name. And so we'll go ahead and get started. And Mr. Harris, I'll turn it over to you whenever you're ready.
Thank you. And thank you to the Greenville Pitt Chamber for hosting this event. Thank you to all of the sponsors for hosting this event. This is actually, I like these kind of events because this is a chance to get to be one of the least important people in the room. I have a colleague who just mentioned a few minutes ago that he was going to be here, but he wasn't one of the important people. And it occurred to me, we actually up here, we're the servants. One of us is seeking, we're all seeking to be your servant, your representative. And I thank you for showing up to make informed decisions when you're picking your representative. And I'm going to tell you why you're supposed to pick me. I am the only peace, prosperity, and justice candidate standing on this or sitting on this stage. We have a government that is out of control. We have a government that has abandoned its devotion to peace. We have a government that's been on a war footing since the end of World War II, and it's costing us money that we cannot afford. We have a government that is currently taxing us out of existence. We have a government that's currently tariffing our agriculture and our manufacturers and our trade out of existence illegally and unconstitutionally. And we have very few people who are willing to go to Washington and stand up to the powers that be, we all know their names, and fight for the people that matter, the people on the ground, the people that are just outside city limits out here pulling tobacco, like Alan Thomas used to do when he was a kid. Those people are the people that matter. They're the ones who need to be able to sell their soy when the crop comes in and China isn't buying from us anymore because we've decided to start a trade war we can't win. We need to be prosperity focused. If we're not open for business, other countries are. China, Brazil, Russia, they're making out like bandits right now. We need to elect somebody who's willing to stand for trade. I also told you I'm the justice candidate. We need a representative who's willing to stand up and say to Congress and say to the American people the things that need to be said, like we need to end the war on drugs. Doesn't matter what you think about drugs, the fact of the matter is that trillions of dollars later, we have more people in prisons for putting a plant in their body or doing what they want with their body than China has in prison. And we're supposed to be the land of the free. Doesn't sound like we have a whole lot of freedom to me. So, in the course of this event today, we're going to see which candidates up here stand for peace, and which candidates stand for prosperity, and which stand for justice, and which candidates have the character and the integrity to go to Washington and represent you and represent your best interests, and then come home and live the same life that all the rest of us live. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Holt.
Good morning, or afternoon. I appreciate you inviting me, and I just want to start out by saying in 2016, when they were running the primaries, I was a Trump supporter, and I still am. I felt like he would be a change for business, and I'm a small businessman. And I do think that he has changed and business has prospered. And so I'm glad I supported him in that respect. And, you know, I live more in the rural area, but I think in the rural part of our district, I think I have the values of about 80% of that district. I think they're hardworking. I think they go out every day. They try and make their money to, you know, pay their bills, to keep their car payment paid, and groceries and electric bills and things like that, and to pay their government health care, and to keep enough money there in the funds for them to send money to the illegals. And so, you know kind of where I'm going there. But I'm more of an old school, hardcore Republican. I know I'm Constitution Party, but that's the way I used to be. And I just felt like we ought to have more self-reliance. We ought to be living in a world where it's less taxes, less burdens on us from laws and regulations. And at the same time, though, you know, like the Obamacare, if a young man was 22 years old and before Obamacare, his payment for a month for health care was about $90. And now that we have the Obamacare, his health care payment now is $500. So guess what? He doesn't have health care. And so I think that hurts. And I have a friend that's a doctor in New Bern, and she delivers babies and has for 20 years, a good Christian woman. And the same thing there. She was paying around $1,000. Now she pays over $3,000. And you say, well, she's got the money. That's not the point. The point is it's costing us a lot more. So in the veterans, I guess would be one of my last issues. I've had the Veterans Affairs gentleman, Glenn Batten, who used to be deputy director. He came to me, God sent, because I didn't go after him. Mrs. Perry had actually contacted him. And he came in and he's backed me. There's almost 70,000 veterans, and he's passionate about the veterans. And he promised to help me run that part of the for the district and to add a couple of more offices, because I do think we need that. And I appreciate y'all having me here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Murphy?
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, I guess. Greg Murphy here. I'd like to thank the Chamber for hosting this event. I'd like to thank you guys all for coming out, and I'd like to thank the candidates for putting their name on the line. It takes a lot. Just by way of introduction, I know some of you guys, some of you I don't know, just a little bit about me. I have tried really since a young age to lead a life that I thought would be one of service. Service as a youth and volunteering, service as a surgeon, service as a medical missionary across the globe, trying to take care of our fellow man. This campaign, however, is really not about me. It's about the people of the 3rd District. It's not about personality. It's not about showmanship. It's about the people of the 3rd District, their needs, their values, and their beliefs, and who best actually suits those individual needs, values, and beliefs and carries that message to Washington, D.C. I've looked at public service, and I believe that's an extension of a life of service. It would be my greatest honor to serve as your congressman. Congressman Jones served this region for over 20 years. He did so with honesty, he did so with integrity, and he did so with purpose. And I hope you have my pledge to be the same. You know, I can't say that we always agreed on everything, but you always knew where Congressman Jones stood. He did not waffle. He didn't take one stance in front of one people and one stance in front of another person. I will do the same. My history in medicine is one of being a surgeon. We're known for being pretty direct. That's how I will be. I've been the same message throughout the entire district to whomever I've spoken to, and that will be the same. I promise you, you know, when we started this, my platform was about we the people. That was empowering people, moving power away from a bureaucratic, massively overburdened Washington, D.C., back to the people here of Eastern North Carolina. That message continues the same. It will be about lower taxes, less government, and more personal liberty. If you look at our district is literally the most diverse district in the state. Up in the northeast corner, our folks actually identify more with Virginia because of the media market. You move out to the coastland and you have recreational fishermen. You have commercial fishermen. You have tourism that's so important. You go down to our south, our military, which is the basis and the biggest constituency in our district. You know, Camp Lejeune, Cherry Point. And then you come up in the basin, the massive and voluminous, abundant farming that we have. Those are diverse issues throughout our district. And we need someone that's actually that has a history of looking at complex problems and solving them. I've done that as a dedicated surgeon, I've done that as a hardworking businessman, and as a successful legislator. I will not pretend that I have all the answers, I surely don't. But I will tell you this, big government and big promises are not the answer. If that's what you want, then you don't vote for me. I will promise you that I am here to empower the people of Eastern North Carolina. I will stand, and I will stand with consistency, dignity, honesty, and integrity, and I will stand for the people of Eastern North Carolina. I thank you all, and God bless you, and I hope we have a great forum today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Murphy. Mr. Thomas.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the Chamber and everyone here for participating in this event. It's important that we spend time with you, and not just here in Greenville, but all across 17 counties of this district. This is a district that deserves to hear from each of us candidates one-on-one and spend time together. We have about 3 or 4 weeks left in this campaign. This is the first time that all 4 candidates have sat at the same table. So I would like to offer for all 4 of us to pick 3 or 4 other sites that we go to Elizabeth City, we go to Jacksonville, we go to different parts of this district because people deserve to understand and have a conversation, a dialogue on what's important. Because it needs to be a one-on-one discussion about what is on your plate, the troubles that you have. You know, I've spent a lot of time every single day when I can with the farmers down in Hyde County, you know, with business folks up in Elizabeth City. They're concerned about what their prospects look like for Eastern North Carolina. Many times we felt like we're left behind and we aren't well represented. We need to understand that health care within 24 months is within a tipping point. So we can't send representation up here that's already basically being lobbied to and already have been invested in, which is the biggest problem in this country right now. With Citizens United, candidates are basically funded on the Democratic and Republican side across the board. So when they show up, they're already indoctrinated in terms of where they want to stay and what they want to do. You've got to decide. If you want a candidate that's going to represent Eastern North Carolina, then you need to make that investment and look at us very closely. Look at our history. Look at what we've done. I was born and raised right here in Eastern North Carolina. I grew up in the big city of Vanceboro, some of y'all may know. And yes, I did pull tobacco for a good bit. How many else did that out here in this audience? That's what we bought our blue jeans money with, as they like to say. And I played in these coastal waterways. And let me tell you about how I was raised. Everybody pulled their feet up under our table. Everybody. That's how we were brought up. To be servant leaders, to serve our community, and that is something I'm very proud of. especially being here in Greenville. It's great to see so many of you. We went through an incredible period here in this city for a number of years. I was honored to serve on the Board of Adjustment and Planning and Zoning, and then being elected mayor back in 2011. You remember what Greenville was like back in that period of time. It's one thing to say what you're going to do. It's another thing when you're a convening force. That's what we need. People that aren't divisive, people that don't pick sides, people that don't just in the shadows have whisper campaigns about candidates and other folks, but people that are willing to work together. That's what we got to do here. We need to fix health care. We need broadband as a utility across all of Eastern North Carolina. We need to convene together, and I know there's over 40 or 50 different super PACs that have funded other campaigns in this election. My campaign is funded by the people, not a single super PAC. That's something you need to understand. And also, I've made no blind commitments to any other branch of government. That's why Republican leaders and board officials in other counties have actually resigned their seats to support us in bipartisan measure. And that's why we're going to represent all of Eastern North Carolina.
Thank you. Okay, now we'll move into the Q&A portion of the forum. Today's Q&A portion will be conducted again in rotating alphabetical order by last name. Each candidate will be given 1 minute to answer each question. For example, we'll start with Mr. Harris. He will answer question number 1, followed by Mr. Holt, Dr. Murphy, and Mr. Thomas. Then question number 2 will be answered first by Mr. Holt, followed by Dr. Murphy, Mr. Thomas, and then Mr. Harris. Remind the candidates that this is not a true debate, and so we will not allot additional time for rebuttal if another candidate's name is invoked. With this being the case, please keep your answers on topic for each question. As before, we'll have the timekeeper down here up front. She'll give you a 15 or 30-second warning, and then we'll hold up the stop sign when it's time to conclude. We'll get through as many questions as we can. We're going to conclude this portion of the forum at 12:45 or shortly thereafter. And so are there any questions about the format?
We'll just follow you.
Yeah, good idea.
Excellent.
All right, question number 1. We'll start with Mr. Harris on this question. This is a question on tax reform. In December of 2017, President Trump signed into law a sweeping federal tax reform act impacting nearly every person and business in the U.S. As part of the act, corporate tax rates were cut, personal income tax rates have seen a temporary reduction, and the standard deduction has nearly doubled for many filers. Despite the extensive reform, some taxpayers and stakeholders have expressed concerns about larger tax bills, smaller refunds, the impact that tax reform will have on the federal deficit. What is your opinion of the so-called Trump tax reform law? And if there are any parts of the law that you don't support, how would you propose changing those parts? Mr. Harris?
Well, I'm a libertarian. If any of you know what libertarians feel about taxes, I'm always happy to see them go down. But we have a problem with this tax law. Taxes reflect the amount of money that our government is spending. And here's where I'm going to go off topic from the tax bill a little bit. And it's when we cut taxes, whether they're corporate taxes, whether they're personal income tax rates, whatever we do that's cutting the amount of money that the government's bringing in, but we're not cutting the amount of money that the government's spending. All we're doing is raising taxes on the next generation. A tax cut without a spending cut is a tax hike later on. And that's always been the problem with this tax bill. I don't have a problem with the bill itself. Lowering taxes is always better. That's your money. There's no reason why it should come out of your wallet just because you got a job. That's not the way it's supposed to work. But unless we start cutting spending, and we're seeing the effects of that now, $22 trillion debt. We've got the White House budget request with $4.5 trillion. This is an absurd level of spending, and they two have to go together.
Mr. Holt?
When this was passed, Walter Jones voted against it. And I thought, my goodness, Walter, I said, let us have the money to spend. Don't leave it in Washington for them to waste. And so I was for it. But at the same time, Mr. Harris is right. All we're doing is we reduce it, but we increase spending. And that's what's going on all the time. We need to get in there. We need to cut out wasteful spending, cut out things that are really not good for us. There's a lot of things that can be cut. And I think, for instance, $4.6 billion to the border, and we got no wall out of it. All it was humanitarian. So our tax cut, we deserved it, and I was for it.
Dr. Murphy?
Yes, sir. I think the Trump tax cut initiative has spurred our economy. We are literally having the best economy that this nation has had in 50 years. Our unemployment is at record level lows. So there is more money going into the federal government because of the tax cuts. However, our nation does not have a tax problem. It has a spend problem. And that's one thing I would actually say with this economy, our deficit should be decreasing, not increasing. And if you want big government, again, I'm not your candidate. And so pulling that money back by spending, by overspending in this national government is where it needs to go. So as far as any type of different reform, it's going to be not the tax issue problem, because that spurs growth, that spurs investment, that spurs jobs. What we have to do is pull back from the federal government. The federal government should not be an employment agency. We have a spending problem.
Mr. Thomas?
Well, you can't talk about taxes without having a holistic approach, and I agree with what was said up here, that spending is a tremendous part of the equation that we have to understand. But also understand, I feel like we kind of had a bait and switch with this particular plan. It was temporary for the middle class and those on the lower end of the economic spectrum, but it was long-term for the corporate dollars. So you have a lot of companies that are able to do tax avoidance, and I'm sure it went well for those that helped write the plan. But if you're in the middle class, or if you're one of the people that I know that have 2 or 3 jobs that are just trying to survive out here in this country right now, you don't have coverage, you have nothing. And we had to go back and look at 2 things. Number one, we got to be able to go back and get a hold of the spending issues that we've got across this country. If the economy is so good, this is when we should be actually cutting spending, and I agree with that across the board. But this actually ends up increasing the overall debt for the nation. It's a temporary cut, I think, for folks that are on the middle class and all the way through, and it's tax avoidance for the large corporate structure. That's just where we are. This needs to be one step for other steps we need to go forward here in the country.
Thank you. All right, question number 2. This is a question on foreign trade policy and tariffs with China. Mr. Holt, we'll start with you for this question. In recent weeks, we have seen significant escalation in the so-called trade war between the United States and China. With threats to cancel upcoming U.S.-China trade talks, it appears that this so-called trade war could continue into the foreseeable future. This is concerning for many here locally, as much of the state's $2 billion in annual exports to China, which include lumber, tobacco, and pork products, are sourced right here in eastern North Carolina. What's your position on U.S.-China trade relations and the impact on your would-be constituents?
Well, the farmers are really hit hard on this, and a lot of businesses. And I know the tariffs are hurting them right now. But I think at some point we needed to step up and see if we could get on an equal playing field. Because like when they come in here and they dump fish into our coast that they pay 25 cents an hour and the quality's not good, and so somebody's going to pay $2 a pound for it. Our fishing industry relies on quality, and they charge a little more because it costs more. And so if you can't equal it out and get the tariffs in place to help them in the end. And farmers are overproducing now because one particular farmer, Doug Cowan, and I know that Mr. Thomas knows him, but Doug, he's went out of the hog business because he's overproducing, got no money for what he was selling. So tariffs are good, but they need to stick with it until it gets it accomplished what they're trying to accomplish.
Dr. Murphy?
Yes, I'm actually, as an economist, not a big fan of tariffs. I believe in free trade. I believe in free market. I believe that's best how America has made its impact upon the world. However, past administrations have put a blind eye to what China has done to so many of our industries. We have been given such an unfair trading advantage. And in this instance, where tariffs were instituted, it actually brought Mexico and Canada back to the table. Mexico is now, because of our border crisis, now actually using their National Guard to stem the flow of illegal immigrants into our country. So our president has used tariff as part of an armamentarium to try to bring people to the table. Is there short-term pain? For sure. Our farmers are definitely suffering because of dropping commodity prices. But hopefully, in the long term, they'll be brought back to the table. Because I will tell you, despite what you're not hearing, China is hurting. And so hopefully there will be somebody that will come back to the table, and sometimes it takes a big stick to do this. Sometimes it takes a big stick to bring a big country back to the table, and we'll have actually free trade and equal trade with China.
Mr. Thomas?
Well, there's no question that China has exploded their economy in the past 15 to 20 years on our backs. It's pretty clear. The theft of technology, so much drain of economic value that's been brought over to China. When it's been an imbalance for so many years, and that's what we have to work on and understand. And I do agree that from a tariff standpoint, that we should have addressed this prior. Many years ago, it should have been an overall strategy over a number of years. But now we're in a situation where if you're going to have a strategy with such draconian measures, it's got to be part of a holistic approach. We have so many farmers and fishermen, and talking to Jason Jones, who's a commissioner, Republican commissioner over in Craven County, and connecting him with the USDA and the fact that they've already put these crops in place. There was no planning. The federal government has not made plans to handle our vulnerabilities. If you're going to impose tariffs, you've got to make sure you protect the most vulnerable parts of your economy to make sure that Eastern North Carolina doesn't lose a generation of farmers, not a generation of commodities, because that's where we are. After flood and drought and hurricane, we have an entire generation of folks here in Eastern North Carolina, and that's our job, to be the advocate for Eastern North Carolina.
Mr. Harris?
Trade wars are bad, and they're hard to win. We were told otherwise a couple of years ago, and it's being proven that trade wars are bad and hard to win. What we have is we have a choice between 3 people who want tariffs and 3 people who want less free trade and less freedom, and somebody who's going to go to Washington and who's going to stand for actual free trade. The greatest engine of our prosperity in this nation has been the ability to move goods and services across borders, and that includes labor. Labor is a good and a service, and this is where the immigration issue becomes part of that. Human beings need to be able to move across borders just like goods and services need to be able to move across borders with the lowest possible costs. I'm the only person up here who's going to tell you get rid of tariffs. I'm the only person up here who's going to tell you free trade has imbalances. That happens. That's not a bug. That's a feature of the system. You will end up with trade imbalance. That's because we end up with a cash reserve.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to question number 3. Dr. Murphy, we'll start with you for this one. This is a question on military spending. As you know, North Carolina's military presence is as strong as that of most any U.S. state or territory. With more than 500,000 employees, the military and defense industries are the second largest employment sector in North Carolina and contribute more than $66 billion annually to our state's economy. Because of the critical role that military bases play in North Carolina, the specter of another base realignment and closure is often on the minds of our constituents. What steps, if any, would you take to protect North Carolina's military bases?
As I said earlier, if you look at our constituencies throughout the district, our military is actually our biggest constituency. If you look at Camp Lejeune, you look at Cherry Point, you look at the FRC, those are the largest number of employers actually in our district. And if you look at military spending, why do we spend what we do? We cannot stick our head in the sand and say that if we're nice to everybody, they will be nice to us. Yes, there may not be overt attacks, there may not be bullets fired, but there is cyber attacks that occur in this nation by the hundreds and thousands every day. We have to equip our military to do that, protect our interests both here and abroad. Now, if you look at what's trying to protect our citizenry, I'm not going to come in and slash the military budget. I'm not going to do it. Everybody, when we look at our deficit, everybody is wide open. But to come in and say I'm going to slash military spending as the first inset is ridiculous. That's not good for our nation. It's especially not good for Eastern North Carolina. It takes a balanced approach to look at everything in our entire budget, to look at it critically, to see where we have fraud, waste, and abuse, to take care of things, and that's what I will do.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas?
I've spent the past 2 years working directly with the U.S. Marine Corps and the Army and also with the Coast Guard. And one of the big missions of the transport, many don't realize, is to help stand up readiness with our military. Over 22,000 military aircraft touch and goes over the past 2.5 years when we were running that. And a big part of this is also understanding that our civilian complex here, our goal is this, from Seymour Johnson all the way down to Morehead City. We have a massive opportunity around some of the new systems that are coming on board with our military that could bring thousands and thousands of civilian jobs related to the upkeep and assistance of FRC East and the F-35 platforms and new technologies. We have to invest in these bases. We have to invest in this region. That is our real future here in the East. There's no reason we can't be just like Boeing in the state of Washington, what we can't do in Wichita. Eastern North Carolina has a massive opportunity on the military civilian base and MRO across the East. And in Congress, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to work with the entire region. I've got a 2-year head start on this, already working across the nation to be able to invest the training with the community colleges and bring Eastern North Carolina forward. We have to invest heavily in our military complex here across the East and make sure we continue to grow. And also the places that are still wiped out by hurricanes from 2 years ago, which were funded and that money's been frozen because of waiting for the border issues. We need to get our money and get roofs fixed and get blue tarps off of our bases.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
I'm the only veteran sitting on this stage. I don't know about Mr. Von Stein. So I understand firsthand the needs of our armed forces, especially here in Eastern North Carolina. But I also understand something else. All the money that they're going to tell you gets invested in Eastern North Carolina by these bases and by our military infrastructure, all that money came out of our wallets. That wasn't profit generated, that wasn't productivity, that wasn't increase in GDP. That money came out of our wallets to begin with. Yes, I support the reopening of the Base Realignment Commission. I support it wholeheartedly, and we need to start with the overseas bases. We have 800 bases overseas. Before we start slashing bases here, we need to start over there, and that's part of the larger conversation around our military posture worldwide. We simply cannot afford the amount of money we're spending. We budget $750 billion for military spending annually. We actually spend 1.25 to 1.5 trillion. We are spending ourselves into the poorhouse. We cannot survive. Try running those ships when we're out of money. We cannot survive if we don't start making cuts.
Mr. Holt.
The military is very important to me, and I would not cut any funds for the military. I think they're important to our economy in the whole eastern part of our state, there's no doubt. And we need to keep the strongest presence in the world because that is your defense. If you're strong, they're not going to mess with you. And we need to remember that. And it does supply a lot of jobs, and if you pull the military out of here, we're in big trouble economically. And that was one of the reasons that I spoke of Glenn Batten earlier, and I'm going to speak again. He was on a lot of the Base Realignment Committee meetings because Mr. Jones couldn't attend them because of his health and other reasons. But he's very familiar with it, so I think I've got a real expert in my corner, and I appreciate his help. I really do.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Question number 4. Mr. Thomas, we'll start with you here. This is a question on gun control. In recent weeks, we were all shocked to hear about 2 mass shootings that occurred in less than 12 hours. While we can universally agree that these shootings were needless and tragic, the topic of what should be done to stem gun violence in America is a subject of major disagreement in Congress. Please discuss your stance on gun control and what actions you would take in furtherance of that stance if elected.
First of all, I'm a gun owner and I'm a believer in the Second Amendment. But I also understand that as citizens, we need to make sure that we have as a father of a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old and a 6-year-old that come and ask me and say, will I be safe in school? We have an obligation and a duty to our communities to make sure our children are safe and make sure we're safe. Right across the street over here back in 2013 is a day I will never forget. We had our own mass shooting here, a terrible tragedy. It could have been much worse. So it is very kind of personal to me. My thoughts are this. There needs to be, obviously, we've ignored mental health for decades. We've turned people loose that need help. We've also done a poor job of identifying folks that are threats across the community. And I also think some of our tenor and our language across the nation right now is not helping as well. This is one of these issues, just like we have a hurricane or anything else, that we need to come together and get the nonsense and the corporate dollars out of the way. And we need to put the proper steps in place to help identify those that have mental illness and issues and make sure they have zero chance. The gentleman over here had sealed records over in Maryland that we should have known about. So we got to increase record and response and make sure we can keep the guns out of the hands of those that have issues and watch our tenor.
Thank you. Mr. Harris?
The Second Amendment is an absolutely vital part of our Bill of Rights. There's a reason why it's there, but it's not the real issue, and neither are the guns. We don't have a gun problem, we have a violence problem. In almost every single mass shooting that has occurred in the past 10 or 15 or 20 years, each one of those individuals was on a known trajectory to violence. When you have, for example, the young man in Florida, when the sheriff's department has been 8, 10, 12, 15 times to that home for domestic violence calls, for neglect, for abuse calls, our community is doing a terrible job of intervening, of stepping in, of providing the support needed when people are signaling that they are on a trajectory that's going to lead to violence. Because it will. Because that's the society we've created. The problem is not the tool being used. The problem is that we have created violent, and unfortunately it sounds like profiling, but it is the truth, violent young men. And we have to do a better job of raising our young men, and we have to do a better job of keeping an eye on them. And I don't mean spying on them, but I mean being attentive to their needs and understanding when those signals are there, because we're missing the signals.
Thank you. Mr. Holt?
Gun ownership is something that should be. Unfortunately, we have people that should have been checked out better or monitored more. Mental health issues are coming into play. We don't have God in our society, and most of it. That's a big problem too. So a lot of things have happened that we should have more control over, but I don't want to go to red flag laws or anything like that, because that opens up another can of worms. We just need to monitor it, and when people are approached or when people have problems, especially our law enforcement, they continually go to one place or continually see signs of dangerous things going on. I think they need to step in and do something about it. And we have relatives and loved ones. You can't just say, hey, my uncle's this. You got to have a little bit more background than that. But we do need to follow up and with the mental issues, and the guns are not the problem. It's the people and the mental issues.
Dr. Murphy?
I think it's a sad commentary that some have said in politics that no crisis should go to waste. You can't make good decisions based upon emotion, and that's what a lot of people want to do. I will tell you this now, actually, having been personally in healthcare for 30 years, no sane person goes into a school, goes into a crowd, and takes the life of an innocent. No sane person does that. Be it with a firearm, be it with a truck running over people, be it with a truck taking explosives and blowing up a building. No sane person does that. You know, knives don't kill people. So we look at this. I'm a full supporter of our Second Amendment. But having been in healthcare, I look at the problems that we have. One of the things in Raleigh that I've worked so hard on is the opioid addiction. We have two legs to the stool that we worked on, supply and demand, and now we're working on substance abuse. That by far, mental health is the biggest crisis that we have, in my opinion, in this state and in this nation. And we cannot stick our head in the sand and pretend it does not occur. We have to deal with that issue.
Okay, moving on to question number 5. Mr. Harris, we're back around to you. We'll start with you on this one. This is a question on healthcare reform. Nationally, many 2020 presidential candidates and congressional leaders from the Democrat Party have voiced support for a Medicare for All system, which would create a single-payer healthcare system. During the previous election cycle in 2016, many congressional Republicans successfully ran on a repeal and replace healthcare platform. It seems clear that both sides believe that healthcare in the U.S. is in need of reform. Please discuss your views on healthcare reform and the related policy ideas that you would take with you to Congress.
Healthcare does need reform. And reform will never come from government, because government has been the problem in our healthcare system since all the way back in the 1950s or 60s, when we started calling it a healthcare system instead of realizing it was simply people serving people. I'm a veteran. I have experience with the Veterans Affairs Department and VA medical care. If we want single payer, government-run health care, go to the VA hospital and then come back and tell me what you think of it. It's not going to be a good experience. And I'm not trying to blame the practitioners in the VA hospitals. Those are good, honest, hardworking people. It's the government, it's the mountains of regulation that the Congress has imposed on what they do. Healthcare cannot be fixed by government, and it cannot be fixed, especially in the state, by Medicare expansion, Medicaid expansion. We have candidates on this stage who have supported Medicaid expansion. This is not going to fix our problems. It's unsustainable for our budget here in this state, and it's basically just more government healthcare control. We need to get back to a free market in our healthcare system, which we have not had in most of our lifetimes.
Mr. Holt?
The healthcare situation has increased in price a lot over the last 6-7 years, and it's very costly, and everything goes through government-owned or hospital-owned doctors now. And when we had just simple practitioners that you could go into their private office, I think things were a lot better. But when you go combining everything and you get rid of any competition, or people need choice, and they need to be able to just go to a simple practitioner and their insurance gets honored there. I know I went to a Medigap pharmacy, and I couldn't go there anymore because my insurance didn't cover it there. And that was kind of upsetting because I dealt with them for 10 years. But I think we need to go through and get back to really simple, get a lot of these corporate entities out of the health care, and also get the government-owned entities out of it too.
Dr. Murphy?
I'll need about 3 hours for this question, if you don't mind. I will tell you that healthcare is in need of reform. I've been in it firsthand as a surgeon, as running a private practice, as the chief of staff of a $1.8 billion medical center. It is in need of reform. But I will tell you, Medicare reform by the Democrats will bankrupt this country and will deliver a healthcare system that none of us will want. I've worked around this globe, and I have seen many, many different types of healthcare. You do not want government-run healthcare. Now, again, I could literally talk for hours on how best we could actually turn this ship around. We do have the best healthcare in the world. We don't have the best healthcare results. That's our problem. People cannot afford it. They cannot afford the $2,000 a month that Obamacare promised, that you'd have lower premiums, you'd get your doctors. That was a flat-out lie. That was a flat-out lie. So if you believe Medicare for all, that's a lie also. There is a good way to do this. It is not Medicare for all.
Mr. Thomas?
Well, partisan rhetoric is the biggest problem we have in healthcare right now, I'll be honest with you. And also the amount of millions and billions of dollars that are paying for folks to run an office right now is the other big problem we're having in healthcare. I started a healthcare technology company back in 1998 with a fellow East Carolina graduate. We built it from the ground up. So we've dealt with this. I know what it's like to meet payroll and deal with healthcare from year to year. What we need is a reintroduction of competition in healthcare. You need to be able to go and get your Blue Cross Blue Shield plan in Virginia the same way you could get it here. If insulin has priced you out here in the United States, you need to be able to go to Canada and get your insulin. Whatever you need to be able to do, we have to reintroduce concepts here where we have competition. That's what we've got to do. But we can't abandon our sick and our weak and those that need help. That's the number one indication of a society. Are you making sure that those that need help across your nation are taken care of? It's great to talk in platitudes and rhetoric, but at the end of the day, this is a complicated problem that we've got to all work together and get the D's and the R's out of it, and most importantly, the big pharma money out of it and those that are buying candidates. We need people to be able to go up here and act independent and work independent with experience and get it done.
Thank you. Question number 6 will be our final question before we turn to closing statements. Question number 6 is, the topic for question number 6 is the U.S. budget deficit and national debt. Mr. Holt, we'll start with you for this one. Recently, the U.S. Office of Management and Budget estimated that the federal deficit will once again top $1 trillion in 2019. The current U.S. national debt is estimated to be about $22.5 trillion, and at 106% of GDP is the highest debt to GDP ratio that we've seen since the onset of World War II. How do you propose that Congress rein in the deficit spending and begin reducing the national debt?
Pray a lot would be one, but we need to stop spending. We can't just keep giving things away. We all work hard to pay our taxes, and it just depresses me that they can just sign something and next thing you know, 4.6 is at the border. For people that aren't even legal citizens, aren't even legally here, they're not even obeying our laws. So I don't know exactly how you would go about it, but I do know we need to rein in spending. That's number one. And we need to go back and get fraud and stuff out of our entitlements. It's loaded with waste. People that are working, and if you want to keep letting people come in illegally, you better change your IRS and go to a national sales tax. That way everybody pays, not just 48% of us. So we need to do something. We need to look at it outside the box. We need to do something different for sure.
Thank you. Dr. Murphy?
As I said previously, I don't think that this nation has a tax problem. I think it has a spend problem. And if you look at the biggest components of what we spend our money on, are entitlement programs. I'm probably going to say something here people don't want to hear, but I'm not here to tell you all what you want to hear. I don't do that in different audiences. I'm going to tell you what you need to hear. I'm 56 years old. You know, Social Security is right around the corner. We need to start moving that age up. Because here we are, we're in an aging population where our folks that are putting into the system are now going to be fewer and fewer, and more are going to be taking from the system. We can't do that. We can't do that. And so if you look at different segments of our society, there has to be some dealing with entitlement programs. You know, that's where we have our spending problem. We have to look at ways that we do get rid of fraud, waste, and abuse in our government and actually care for the people who put into the system, but actually need to change the parameters of the system.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas?
A lot of good discussion here on different things that we need to do. This is one of those, there's clearly no silver bullet. But again, to be able to take care of this, you have to understand that we've got to find certain drivers in this economy that we can get back to investing again. We got to take the regulatory controls off our small business people and put them in the position to be able to succeed. That's a big element of this. We need to start investing again in those that put their money back into the economy. We've created an economy that's created a system of tax avoidance for those on the higher corporate end that is systemic at this point in the country. And we've got to get real about how we're going to spread that across the base. You have to invest, first of all, in your country in the right elements to be able to grow that economy. Also, you've got to cut spending, period. This budget that just passed added $1.7 trillion for someone who said that he was going to lower this within 8 years and eliminate much of the debt. That's where we are. I stand with Walter Jones. We've got to hold the ground on spending. It's got to be something that we got to take a look at it across the board. And also, we have to start investing more in small business across this country and put us in a position to succeed.
Mr. Harris?
It's unsustainable. I said earlier we're going to collapse if we don't stop spending the way we're spending. But, and if any of you would like longer answers to any of this, feel free to see me after we're done here, because they can all tell you 1 minute it's impossible. One of the biggest things that we need to address is the fact that half of our spending is entitlement spending, and those are things that we need to make adjustments to. We need to end the Social Security system. We need to have a born after date. If you're born after this date, you're not paying Social Security, and you're never going to get any. And we let it die when the last person who's on Social Security dies. And that's going to require that we tighten our belt, because it's a Ponzi scheme. It requires people paying into it in order to keep paying out. So we're going to have to tighten our belt and cut other places. Half of our government spending is non-entitlement, discretionary. Half of that is bombing brown children on the other side of the planet. And that has to come to an end, because we cannot afford it, and it's immoral and unjust. 25% of our budget is spent bombing brown children on the other side of the planet these days.
Thank you all very much for your insightful answers and discussion today. At this time, we'll allow each candidate 2 final minutes for a closing statement. As with opening statement, we'll proceed alphabetically with Mr. Harris beginning. And Mr. Harris, you can take the floor when you're ready.
I feel like I should continue my last answer some here. But if any of you have ever found yourself driving around in a little piece of crap car, station wagon, whatever, I don't mean to impugn station wagons for anybody who drives them, and you've ever looked at some other car that you wish you were driving, you ever thought about trading it in? Well, this is your opportunity, because we've got station wagons and old beaters of parties that are trying to win this election. And here's your opportunity to go test drive another car. Here's your opportunity to go test drive that car that you might have been looking at, and if you don't like it, we'll be right back here in 6 months when the election cycle starts again, and you can go trade it in and get that station wagon back. It's time we start making changes to the way we're electing our congressmen in particular. Presidents, I don't care about. It's a useless show job. The power in our government is meant to reside in the Congress. This is the most important election for our federal government that you could be paying attention to. And I thank you all for coming out here and paying attention. Because this is where the power is supposed to reside. And this is where we're not getting it right. Fool me for 160 years, shame on me. If you've got a problem with the way this government is, and if you've got any problems with the way the trajectory this nation is on, guess who's been running the show since the end of the Civil War? Two parties, and they're up here on the stage. If you would like change, if you want to put your vote where your mouth is, there is change on your ballot in this election. And I know that most of you aren't used to seeing that change on your ballot, but it's here and it's ready. And if you want change, change is on your ballot. You just have to make sure that your vote matches your rhetoric. Just like we have to make sure that our vote matches our rhetoric. Whichever one of us wins and goes there, we're going to answer to you. And I'm asking you to make us answer to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Holt?
One of my reasons for running is because I felt I was very conservative, and I felt like we were trying to get people to vote principle over party. That's been our message all along. And it's still my message. I think in the primaries in a race I had ran, people supported me as a Republican. But when I ran as the Constitution Party for the same job, the people that supported me couldn't vote for me because I wasn't Republican. They liked me when I was Republican. Now they don't like me. So that really got me. So I really think that's what I'm asking people to do. Principle over party. And we need God in our society. And I know a lot of people might not like me talking about that, but we need it. We need things like that going on more. We need drugs out of our society. I thank God for the sheriffs that we have in Pamlico and in Craven, and I think you have a new sheriff here, and I hope that she's working on the drug problems as hard as they are, because they're destroying our young people. We're not going to have a society to turn it over to. I mean, a young crew to turn it over to. They're all going to be, there's so much drugs. And we just have some issues that we need to get back to fundamental. And those are the kind of things I'm going to vote very conservatively. I'm going to have somebody that's there working on the veterans issues and open up a couple of more offices to make it more accessible. Just simple things for right now. And I'm not planning on moving in up there. I want to run for this year. And then y'all can have a battle for next year. But for right now, I want a conservative in there to finish out Walter Jones's term and have somebody in there that's familiar with base realignments, because I hear a lot of talk going on about that. So I would appreciate your consideration. And again, thank you for having me today.
Dr. Murphy.
Thank you again, everybody, for showing up, and I appreciate everybody's attentiveness. It's been good to listen to everybody's different point of view. I will say this, and I will say that this mission has been consistent through my campaign. It's what I did in the House. It's what I'm doing now through two Republican primaries. I'm not here to talk to a different group every time and tell somebody different. My campaign has not been about showmanship. It's been about substance. It's about telling people the truth and telling them what they need to hear. That's what's important. Y'all are going to go to the polls starting tomorrow. You have four very different viewpoints about how we believe our country should be. We have big government, big promises. We have no government. That's not where we need to be. We need to have limited government. Our government has a purpose. We have to protect our borders. We have to protect this nation both here and abroad. And yes, we do need God back in the equation. I think the destruction of the family unit has been the one main cause that's actually caused so many of the ills that we've spoken about. So I will come here today. I believe it's very important that you look at past performance is a great predictor of future results. I'm not going to take claim and credit for something I didn't do. I am who I am, and this is what I've told the voters throughout this entire procedure, is I am who I am. If you believe what I believe, then I am willing to be your servant. I'm willing to go to Washington, D.C. and represent you. Again, this is not about me. This is not about a personality. This is about the good people of the 3rd District, their values, their beliefs, and their needs. So I'm here today to say if you want big government, I'm not your candidate. If you want big highlighted promises about this, that, and the other stuff, I'm not your candidate. I'm going to be real. I'm going to tell you what you need to know and tell you what you need to hear. That's what a surgeon does. And if that's the case, then I'm Greg Murphy, and I'd really appreciate your vote for Congress. Thank you.
Mr. Thomas.
This is really great. All four of us showed up today. You should be thrilled. A number of us have asked for this opportunity, for all of us to have this conversation for the past several months. And when President Trump was here having a presentation, I was in Jacksonville. I was standing in front of the Freedom Fountain. And we were focused on the citizens of Eastern North Carolina. No blind promises to any particular person of any other branch of government. We're focused on what's about getting done here in this part of the state. That's what's important. And when I saw the list of questions for this event today, I was a little surprised. Because if you've seen my sign, it says, I'm not really running for Congress, I'm running for Eastern North Carolina. Because that's what it's really about. It's about your kids and your grandkids. We can get in broad platitudes. A lot of promises have been made during this whole process. My promise is from day one. I said I would not take corporate PAC money because we don't need to be owned. You need to know that I work for you. I don't work for Big Pharma. That's what's wrong with this country right now. Too much not actually going when they show up and actually passing their vote over to someone else. We have issues here that I'm surprised it didn't come up in this conversation. We've had massive hurricane impacts across Eastern North Carolina, to our military bases, to our small towns. If you go to Jones County, there's places that look like the bomb went off, like a ghost town. Here's what I pledge to you. I want to own that issue day one. We need to get serious about moving Eastern North Carolina forward. In the broad structure, just like I did here in Greenville, I came in after the recession. We had over $900 million of growth, working with so many of you in this room to help did that. Because we had a plan and we worked together. And we kept the lowest taxes in the history of Greenville for property taxes when we did it. I have a structure and a plan. I'm a convener. I don't believe in divisive politics. I don't care if you're a D or R or an I. That's how I worked when I was mayor. That's how I work as your congressman. That's what we got to do. It's about Eastern North Carolina first. And let's go vote tomorrow and make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Everybody, let's show some appreciation for our candidates. That concludes our forum. Right now, I'll turn it over to our chamber president, Kate Teal.
Good afternoon. Thank you all again for coming and for being a part of this forum today, for great information and for our candidates as well. I'm Kate Teal. I have the honor of serving as president of the Greenville-Pitt County Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank you all for attending and thank our sponsors one more time. If you would give us all a round of applause for attendance today.